Please leave a comment where you are listening in the world. Share your stories with us too. I should have known something was off the second he said, "I'm not like other guys." In my experience, guys who say that are usually exactly like other guys, but worse. Still, when you're staring down the barrel of another lonely Minnesota winter, and your dating app actually produces someone who doesn't open with DTF, or you up, you take a chance. Even if his bio says things like old soul with young eyes, and cancer warrior sunflower sparkles. His name was Joran. Not Jordan. Not Jason. Joran. Already a red flag. He messaged me first. "You look like you actually read the books in your profile, not just use them as props. That's rare. Want to talk about Vonnegut over coffee? Flattery and literary bait." I bit. We met at a cozy cafe in Uptown called the Bean Beneath. Very Minnesotan. Faux French vibes, iced chai lattes in February. He was already there when I arrived, tall, pale, in that ghostly Victorian way that makes you wonder if he's ever had a vitamin in his life. When I saw him, he stood up. "Mallory," he said, like he'd been waiting forever. No handshake. No hug. Just intense eye contact somewhere between "I'm really into you" and "I've already imagined our children." Then came the first bomb. It's hard to explain to people what it's like living with stage for Hodgkins. You learn not to take time for granted. "No hello, no, what do you do?" "Just that." I blinked. "Oh, wow. That's heavy." He nodded. "It is. But don't worry, I'm not dying yet. Just occasionally fighting death in the ring." He was either deranged or poetic. Possibly both. The thing is, our conversation flowed. He was smart, sharp, and oddly funny. He spoke like he was constantly narrating a memoir. Every sentence felt practiced. He told me about his diagnosis. Said it came out of nowhere a year ago. No specifics. Just, the chemo changed me. Inside and out. And, I lost my appetite for meat but gained one for honesty. We started seeing each other once a week, then twice. Always at my place. He said he moved back in with his mom while he recovered between cycles. He didn't drink, didn't do caffeine. He wore the same navy coat, no matter the weather. But he listened. He watched. He made me feel like I mattered. I ignored the inconsistencies. He would often bring over small gifts. A tattered copy of Camus' The Stranger. An old mixtape with hand-drawn art. A hand-carved keychain he said he'd made in a hospital workshop. It was easy to fall under his spell. It felt like being in a quiet indie film about two misunderstood souls bonding in the snow. One night he cooked for me. Said he wanted to prove he could still live a normal life. He made mushroom risotto. It was terrible, but I smiled and ate it. He told me he used to want to be a poet. Said cancer had taken that from him. He looked up at me with those watery eyes and said, "You remind me of something I used to believe in." I didn't know what that meant, but I didn't ask. Then he asked me to help him set up a fundraiser. He said he was applying for an experimental treatment in New Mexico. Not covered by insurance. Cost? $12,000 up front. He didn't ask me for money. He kept saying that. "I'm not asking you for anything. Just your support." So I made him a GoFundMe. I wrote the copy. Uploaded the photos. Shared it to my story with a crying emoji and the caption, "My person is fighting hard. Please help if you can." In 3 days, it raised $3,200. Most of it from my friends. People from my yoga class. Old college roommates. Strangers who commented, "Stay strong, Joran." 2 days later, he disappeared. Phone off. Texts, left on read. Instagram, deleted. GoFundMe cashed out. Hospitals he claimed to have been treated at? No record of a Joran anything. I Googled. Reverse image searched his profile pics. And there it was. A Reddit thread. Beware of stage 4 Joran. Real name, Keenan Dresch. Pretends to have cancer. Targets women. Steals money. Changes names often. He wasn't just a liar. He was a con artist. One with a trail of broken hearts and stolen cash. I reported him. Sent screenshots. Shut down the GoFundMe. Told my friends. The night after, I sat on the floor of my apartment staring at the novelty mug he'd left behind. It said, "I love existentialism." I threw it against the wall. It didn't break. I cleaned up the glass from the frame he'd given me with a quote inside. In the middle of winter, I found there was, within me, an invincible summer. He'd even lied in the details. The next morning, I downloaded every dating app again. I set my radius to 100 miles and swiped until my eyes burned. And there he was. New name, Lucan. New city. Same face. Lucan, 32, free spirit. searching for someone real in a world of filters. I swiped right. He matched instantly. We chatted. He used the same phrases. Said he was in remission, living with his sister. Said I felt safe. We set a date at a coffee shop in Stillwater. I told him I'd be in a green coat with a yellow scarf. But I didn't go alone. I brought Jasper, ex-boxer turned therapist. Minnesota nice until provoked. He stayed nearby. If things got weird, he'd step in. If not, we'd confront him together. Joran walked in 5 minutes late. Same gray hoodie. Same pale face. Same tote bag. He spotted me, smiled, and then, for just a second, hesitated. His smile faltered. I stood up. "Hi, Joran," I said. He froze. "Sorry?" he asked, pretending confusion. "Or should I say Lucan? Or Keenan?" His eyes darted. Jasper stepped into view. "You're insane," he hissed. "You don't know anything." I pulled out my phone. Recording. "I know you lied about cancer. I know about the GoFundMe. I know about the other women." He clenched his jaw. "You can't prove it." "I can. I have screenshots. Chat logs. Metadata. Remember? I'm a designer." For a second, he just stared. Then he smiled, soft and cruel. "You're not the first woman who fell for me, but maybe the one who stayed bitter the longest." Then he turned and walked out. No fight. No drama. Just gone. I posted the video privately. Not to the world, just to the women on Reddit. We called ourselves the Joran League. We shared names, tips, red flags. We tracked aliases, cataloged phrases he used. It became a digital resistance. A few months later, one woman messaged. "He's in Nashville now. New name, Declan. Says he's a war photographer with PTSD." Another wrote, "He said he was recovering from a car crash. Needed money for physical therapy. He never stopped." As for me, I deleted the apps. Took time off. Rebuilt myself, one hard boundary at a time. I started drawing again. Adopted a one-eyed cat named Balzac. Let myself heal. Last week, I walked past a bookstore. In the window, a mug that said, "I love existentialism." I laughed out loud. Then I bought it. Not because I missed him, but because I won. You ever have one of those dates where everything starts off great, but then a single sentence ruins it all? I did. And that sentence was, "I've slept with 73 people." You. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name's Keziah. I work in HR, but not the stiff corporate kind. I handle community outreach and conflict resolution at a nonprofit in Minneapolis. I like structure, brunch, strong coffee, and men who floss regularly. I'm not asking for miracles, just emotional maturity and maybe a fondness for indie films. I met Micah on a Thursday night in late spring. You know the kind, when the city still smells like snowmelt and everyone's acting like it's already June. We matched on a dating app one won't name, but it rhymes with fringe. His profile was playful. Photos of him in a vintage bomber jacket, running a half marathon, and a blurry shot with a cat he captioned. Not mine. I wish. His bio read, recovering philosophy major. Thinks too much. Runs fast. Needs someone to tell me when my shirt's inside out. I messaged him first. Do you always run with your shirt inside out, or is that just a metaphor for how you live? He replied 5 minutes later. Both, but only on Tuesdays. It was dumb, charming. I liked it. We chatted all weekend. He was sharp, funny, a little intense, but in a way that felt genuine. He made me playlists. He used semicolons correctly. He told me he once cried during a David Attenborough documentary about sea turtles. Our first date was at this rooftop bar downtown with overpriced cocktails and twinkle lights. It was one of those rare dates that just clicked. No awkward pauses. No weird vibes. He listened, he asked questions, he laughed at my terrible pun about HR being people puzzles. We kissed at the end of the night. It was soft, not rushed. I went home smiling. Second date? Dinner and a walk around the lakes. Third? Trivia night with his friends. By the fourth date, I was thinking about taking down my profile. He seemed like someone I could actually build something with. He even made breakfast, real breakfast, not just cereal. Blueberry pancakes with lemon zest. So when he invited me over to his place for dinner a week later, I said yes without hesitation. His apartment was what you'd expect from a guy who used to be a philosophy major. Chaotic bookshelves, thrifted furniture, mugs with quotes from dead authors. He cooked pasta from scratch, poured us red wine, and put on a vinyl record of someone who sounded like they were humming through a canyon. Everything was golden. Until it wasn't. We were sitting on his faded couch, post-dinner haze, feet touching. The conversation had shifted to past relationships, not my favorite topic, but not a deal breaker. I told him about a long-term boyfriend from college, a situationship that never quite landed, and the month I dated a guy who said LOL out loud. Micah nodded. Then he grinned. "Want to know my number?" I blinked. "Your phone number?" He laughed. "No. Like how many people I've slept with." I hesitated. "I mean, you don't have to." 73, he said, proud. I stared at him. "Okay. Isn't that wild? I mean, sure. That's a lot." He laughed again, like he'd just revealed his secret superpower. "I used to keep a list, like initials and cities. But then I realized that was kinda gross, so now I just keep a mental tally." I nodded slowly. Try to keep my face neutral. "You judging me?" he asked. "Not judging," I said. "Just surprised." "Come on. You're not gonna tell me yours?" I shook my head. "That's not really something I feel like comparing." "Why not? It's just numbers." And that's when I felt the shift. The warm buzz of the wine faded. The record turned into background static. He leaned forward, grinning, waiting for me to turn this into a game. But I wasn't playing. "Do you usually bring this up on fourth dates?" I asked. "Not always. But we're vibing, right? Isn't it fun to be open?" I looked at him. Really looked. His eyes sparkled, proud of his so-called honesty. But there was something else there, something like a challenge. Like he was waiting to see if I could handle his truth. "I think there's a difference between being open and being performative," I said quietly. That wiped the grin from his face. "Wow," he said. "Okay, so I guess you're one of those girls who thinks body count matters." "No," I said. "I think the way you talk about it matters." He leaned back, crossed his arms. "It's 2025. Who even cares anymore?" I stood up. "Clearly you do. You brought it up." He looked up at me, mouth open slightly. "You're leaving?" "Yeah, I think I am." He stood too. "You know, this is exactly why I stopped dating serious women. They say they want honesty, but they can't handle it." I walked to the door. "I can handle a lot, Micah. I can handle complicated pasts and baggage, and even red flags. What I can't handle is someone turning intimacy into a scoreboard." He didn't say anything as I left. The next day he texted, "Hey, sorry if that came off the wrong way. I just thought it was cool to be real. Hope you're good." I didn't reply. A week later, I deleted the app. Got tired of turning people into spreadsheets. Now, when I go on dates, I listen more closely. Not just to what they say, but how they say it. The little flourishes, the tone underneath the jokes. Because body counts don't scare me. But people who use them as trophies? Yeah, that's a hard pass. It started like every other hopeful swipe through the dating app. His profile seemed normal, attractive enough, witty, with a bio that read like he had both a sense of humor and a steady job. I wasn't expecting fireworks or a soulmate. I just wanted a pleasant evening out with someone who wouldn't make me regret shaving my legs. What I got was something so bizarre, so mortifying, that even years later, the memory still makes me cringe. The horror began the moment he sent me the location for our date. "Great little Italian place," he texted. Perfect, I thought. Italian food is romantic and safe. Who doesn't love pasta? But then he added, "Oh, and I hope you don't mind, my mom's tagging along." At first, I thought he was joking. His mom? Surely, this was some sort of millennial humor I didn't understand. But no, he quickly clarified, "Yeah, we're a package deal. She'll be there with her OkCupid date. It'll be fun." Fun. That was the word he used. Fun. As if this was some quirky sitcom setup, and not the giant red flag it clearly was. I should have bailed right then and there. I should have ghosted him, blocked his number, and deleted the app entirely. But against my better judgment, and probably because I'd already picked out an outfit, I decided to go. I told myself it couldn't possibly be as bad as it sounded. Oh, how wrong I was. I arrived at the restaurant a few minutes early, hoping to calm my nerves with a glass of wine before the weirdness began. But there they were, already seated at a booth in the back, waving me over like this was some sort of family reunion. Him, his mom, and a middle-aged man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Hey," he said, standing up to greet me. His enthusiasm was unsettling. He hugged me as if we were old friends, and then, with no warning, introduced his mom. "This is Carol, my mom," he said proudly, as if I were meeting the Queen of England. She stood and pulled me into an equally enthusiastic hug. And this, she said, gesturing to the man sitting awkwardly beside her, is Gary. We met online last week. Isn't he great? I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Gary barely made eye contact, mumbling something about how nice it was to meet me. He looked like he was mentally plotting his escape, and for a moment, I envied him. At least he had the excuse of being Carol's date. I, on the other hand, had willingly walked into this nightmare. Let's sit down, my date said cheerfully, oblivious to the absolute chaos he'd orchestrated. I slid into the booth, squished awkwardly between him and the wall, while his mom and Gary sat across from us. The waiter came by to take drink orders, and before I could even glance at the menu, Carol announced that we should all do tequila shots to break the ice. I wanted to crawl under the table. Gary looked like he wanted to too, but my date was all in. Great idea, Mom, he said, high-fiving her like this was spring break in Cancun. I reluctantly ordered a glass of wine, hoping it would take the edge off whatever fresh hell was unfolding before me. The conversation started innocently enough, though Carol dominated it entirely. She talked about her job, her dog, her latest trip to Sedona, and how spiritual the energy there was. Gary nodded along dutifully, clearly uninterested but too polite to interrupt. My date, meanwhile, chimed in with random anecdotes about his childhood, as if his mom needed any reminders of the time he broke his arm trying to skateboard off the roof. I tried to steer the conversation towards something normal, hobbies, movies, anything that didn't involve family dynamics, but it was like shouting into the void. Every time I asked my date a question, Carol would jump in with her own answer. He loves hiking, she said at one point, cutting him off mid-sentence. But he's terrible at it. Remember when you got lost on Camelback Mountain? We had to send a search party. He laughed like it was the funniest thing he'd ever heard. I forced a polite smile, trying to figure out how quickly I could eat my meal and leave without seeming rude. Then came the food. Or more accurately, the food fight. Carol decided it would be cute to feed Gary a bite of her spaghetti, but he flinched, and the fork ended up poking him in the chin. Sauce splattered everywhere, and instead of apologizing, she burst out laughing, dabbing at his face with her napkin like he was a toddler who'd made a mess. Isn't he adorable? She cooed, while Gary stared blankly at his plate, his soul visibly leaving his body. By this point, I was seriously considering faking a phone call or claiming I had an early morning meeting. But my date seemed completely unfazed by the absurdity of it all. This is going great, isn't it? He whispered to me, leaning in like we were sharing some intimate moment. I stared at him, wondering if he was actually delusional or just painfully unaware of social norms. Things took a turn for the truly unbearable when Carol decided it was time for karaoke. Yes, karaoke. In the middle of a crowded Italian restaurant with no actual karaoke setup. She stood up, grabbed a spoon as a makeshift microphone, and launched into an off-key rendition of Don't Stop Believin'. Gary tried to stop her, but she was unstoppable. My date clapped along enthusiastically, as if this was the peak of entertainment. I was mortified. People were staring. The waiter looked like he wanted to intervene, but wasn't sure how to approach a woman belting out Journey lyrics over plates of fettuccine. I prayed for the ground to open up and swallow me whole. Finally, mercifully, the check arrived. Carol insisted on paying, declaring that it was her treat since she'd had such a fabulous time. Gary mumbled something about needing to use the restroom and never came back. I envied his bravery. As we walked out of the restaurant, my date turned to me beaming. So, he said, when can I see you again? I blinked at him, unsure whether to laugh or scream. You're joking, right? I said, unable to hide my incredulity. He looked genuinely confused. What do you mean? Tonight was amazing. Amazing. That was the word he used. Amazing. I managed a polite smile, mumbled something about being busy, and practically sprinted to my car. The moment I got home, I deleted his number, blocked him on the dating app, and poured myself a very large glass of wine. There was no way I was ever putting myself through something like that again. A first date is supposed to be about getting to know someone, not surviving a double date with their mom and her OkCupid disaster. Looking back, I still can't believe I didn't run the second he mentioned Carol. It's become one of those stories I tell at parties, the kind that makes everyone gasp and laugh in disbelief. But at the time, it was pure, unfiltered horror. I wasn't looking for anything serious, just a nice distraction, maybe a fun conversation over drinks. I'd matched with this guy on Tinder a few days earlier. He was older, 43, but that didn't bother me. His profile gave off the kind of energy that suggested he was confident but not cocky, someone who might actually have their life together. He was funny, complimentary in our messages, and seemed genuinely excited to meet me. Against my better judgment, I decided to take a chance. We agreed to meet around 3 p.m., the safe territory of daylight. When I arrived, he was already waiting outside, smiling and waving like we'd known each other forever. His energy was infectious. He cracked a joke right away, and I found myself laughing, my nerves starting to ease. The first hitch came almost immediately. The restaurant we planned to visit had a line snaking out the door. He shrugged it off and suggested we go somewhere nearby, a charming spot on the water he claimed to love. Perfect for a first date, he said, flashing me a grin that felt disarming. I agreed, not realizing then just how wrong he was. The place was beautiful, umbrellas shading tables overlooking the harbor, sunlight glinting off the waves. I thought maybe this won't be so bad. We grabbed a table, ordered drinks, and started talking. He was funny, I'll give him that. Witty enough to keep the conversation flowing, complimentary enough to make me feel flattered, but not overwhelmed. He seemed like he had it all together, until the Mai Tais arrived. I ordered one, just to be polite, but he immediately went for two. They're my favorite, he said, raising his glass in a toast. You haven't lived until you've tried a real Mai Tai. He wasn't kidding about their strength. Halfway through mine, I could feel the alcohol creeping up on me. I wasn't drunk, but I was definitely tipsy, maybe even bordering on drunk if I'd finished the whole thing. Meanwhile, he polished off his first Mai Tai like it was water and waved down the bartender for a second. By the time I finished my drink, he was already on his third. It wasn't long before his demeanor started to change. What had been light-hearted and charming turned intense. He leaned across the table, eyes locked on mine, and said, "You're amazing, you know that? I think I'm falling in love with you." I laughed, assuming he was joking. "We just met," I said, trying to keep things light. "No, I'm serious," he said, his voice low but firm. "You're everything I've been looking for." The words felt like a slap. I didn't know how to respond. It was way too much, too soon. I tried to steer the conversation back to something neutral, but he kept circling back to the same theme. How perfect I was, how he couldn't believe he'd found me, how he thought this might be fate. By the time we left the restaurant, he was visibly drunk. Not stumbling, but there was a glassy look in his eyes, and his words slurred just enough to make me uneasy. As we walked along the street, he suddenly stopped, turned to me, and said, "Marry me." I froze. "What?" "Marry me," he repeated, dead serious. "Why wait? When you know. I tried to laugh it off. "Maybe we take it slow. We did just meet each other." But he didn't laugh. His face darkened, and his whole body tensed. "Take it slow," he snapped. "What does that even mean? I thought you felt the same way." I mean, I like you, but we've only known each other for a couple of hours." He didn't respond. Instead, he stormed off, leaving me standing on a street corner, stunned. I watched as he disappeared into the crowd, my heart pounding with a mix of relief and disbelief. Part of me wanted to call him back just to make sure he wasn't about to wander into traffic, but the bigger part of me knew I needed to cut ties, and fast. I stood there for a minute, trying to process what had just happened. This guy had gone from charming to overbearing to downright hostile in the span of 2 hours. I felt like I'd been on a roller coaster I never wanted to board in the first place. By the time I got home, I thought I was done with him. I'd made up my mind to block his number and move on. But then the text started. "Come over. I miss you." It was 5 p.m. The date had only ended an hour ago, and this man, this 43-year-old man, was texting me like a lovesick teenager. Each message felt more unhinged than the last. I didn't respond, but they kept coming, a relentless barrage of desperation that made my skin crawl. I sat there, staring at my phone, wondering how I'd managed to end up in this situation. It wasn't just the absurdity of his behavior. It was the way he had seemed so normal at first. So charming, so composed. And then, like a switch had flipped, he became someone else entirely. Someone I didn't recognize. Someone I didn't want to be anywhere near. Looking back, I can see all the red flags I ignored. The way he slammed down drinks without hesitation. The way he insisted on a third Mai Tai, even though the bar had a 2-drink limit. The way his compliments felt just a little too intense, a little too rehearsed. But at the time, I brushed them off, telling myself I was overreacting. His profile hadn't exactly wowed me, but he seemed nice enough in our messages, decent, funny in a mildly awkward way, and insistent that we should meet in person because chemistry is better face to face. Against my better judgment, I agreed. Maybe I was too cynical, I thought. Maybe this could be a surprise, the kind of date that blossoms into something when you least expect it. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. When I arrived at the bar, he was already there. Not just sitting, but halfway through his second pitcher of beer. That should have been my first clue to bail, but he didn't seem drunk. In fact, he seemed completely sober, which only made the sheer amount of alcohol in front of him more unnerving. He stood to greet me, flashed an awkward smile, and offered a clumsy compliment about my outfit. Something about him felt off, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. We started talking, and at first it wasn't awful. He was polite, engaged, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. But the more we talked, the clearer it became that we had absolutely nothing in common. His stories felt flat, his jokes didn't land, and every time I tried to steer the conversation towards something more interesting, it fizzled out like a dud firecracker. Still, I stuck it out, telling myself not to judge too quickly. Then came the turning point. I was ready to wrap up the evening. He wasn't rude or offensive, just not my type. But when I mentioned heading out, he practically begged me to stay. "Come on, let's hit one more bar." "Just one drink," he said, his tone teetering on desperate. I hesitated. It was only 8 p.m., and the thought of cutting the night short made me feel unreasonably guilty. Against my instincts, I agreed. The next bar was smaller, darker, and more crowded. We found 2 seats at the bar, squeezed between a boisterous group of friends and a couple who were practically swallowing each other whole. I could feel his eyes on me as I ordered a drink, but it wasn't the kind of gaze that makes you feel flattered. It was intense, calculating, like he was trying to read something beneath the surface. As the couple next to us continued their public display of affection, he leaned in close and asked, "What do you think people here would do if we started making out?" I froze. My gut reaction was to laugh it off, make some joke to defuse the tension. "Probably nothing," I said. "People are too busy with their own drama." But he wasn't joking. His expression didn't shift, and his eyes didn't leave mine. "We should try it," he said. I let out a nervous laugh, trying to maintain some semblance of control. "I don't think that's a great idea," I said, keeping my tone light. "Not really my thing." I excused myself to the restroom, needing a moment to regroup and figure out how to exit this increasingly uncomfortable situation. When I returned, he had ordered a shot for me. Just one shot, none for himself. He slid it across the bar with a wide grin, insisting I drink it. "It's on me," he said, his voice oozing with false charm. "I'm good, thanks," I replied, trying to sound polite but firm. His demeanor shifted instantly. The grin vanished, replaced by a sharp edge of irritation. "Come on," he snapped. "It's just one shot." "No, really." "I'm fine," I repeated. His jaw tightened, and he let out a frustrated sigh before muttering, "Whatever. I'm ready to go." By that point, I was more than ready to leave too. But something about his behavior stuck with me. The man had consumed 2 pitchers of beer for margaritas and 2 pints of beer, and yet he displayed zero signs of intoxication. Not a single stumble, slur, or lapse in coordination. The sheer volume of alcohol alone was staggering, but the way he carried himself made it even more unsettling. As we walked outside, I hesitated. "Are you sure you're okay to drive?" I asked, genuinely concerned. He whipped his head toward me, his expression darkening. "I'm fine," he snapped, his voice dripping with defensiveness. "I can handle my liquor." Without waiting for a response, he stalked off in the opposite direction, disappearing into the night. When I got home, the evening still gnawed at me. Despite how bizarre and uncomfortable it had been, a part of me couldn't shake the worry that something might happen to him on the road. Maybe it was foolish, but I decided to text him, just to make sure he got home safely. His response came quickly, and it hit me like a slap in the face. "I only date girls I fuck on the first date." I stared at my phone, my mind racing between shock, anger, and disgust. The sheer audacity of that message, after everything else he'd said and done, left me speechless. Any lingering guilt or concern I'd felt evaporated instantly. He wasn't just a bad date, he was a walking red flag factory, churning out warning signs faster than I could process them. Looking back, I realize how many moments I ignored my instincts. The way he guzzled beer without showing any effects. The forced charm. The uncomfortable questions and the single, suspiciously targeted shot. It all screamed trouble, but I brushed it off, telling myself I was overreacting. I wasn't. That night taught me a valuable lesson about trusting my gut. Sometimes we ignore the warning signs because we want to believe the best in people. We convince ourselves to stay a little longer, give someone another chance, even when every fiber of our being is telling us to leave. But not everyone deserves that chance. Some people are exactly who they show you they are, right from the start. Dodging that bullet wasn't just luck, it was a wake-up call. And trust me, I'm listening now. I'll never forget the day my dad sat me down and told me this story. The sheer absurdity of it has haunted and amused me ever since. It started as a light-hearted conversation, the kind where you swap funny anecdotes about life and dating. But by the end, I was left staring at him in stunned disbelief, trying to decide whether to laugh or question humanity itself. Let me set the stage for you. My dad, a tall, decent-looking Australian man in his early 50s, had recently decided to dip his toes into the world of online dating. It wasn't something I ever thought I'd see him doing, but after my mom passed away, he'd spent a long time on his own. He wasn't looking for anything serious, just companionship, someone to grab dinner with or share a few laughs. Tinder, he figured, was a modern way to meet people. Little did he know, it was also a gateway into the bizarre. For the first few months, things went relatively well. He matched with a handful of women, went on some pleasant dates, and even made a few friends. He'd tell me about the conversations and how strange some profiles were, but overall, he was enjoying himself. That is, until one weekend when his Tinder experience took a turn for the spicy. It started with a notification, a new message from a woman he'd matched with a few days earlier. She wasn't someone he'd been particularly interested in, but he'd swiped right out of politeness. She was persistent, messaging him often, though her responses were a bit offbeat, to say the least. He chalked it up to her quirky sense of humor and didn't think much of it. Then out of the blue, she sent him a photo. The first thing that struck him wasn't the content itself, but the timing. It was mid-afternoon on a Saturday. Who sends a nude at 2 p.m.? He opened the message cautiously, half expecting it to be a funny meme or a picture of her dog. But no, it was exactly what you're imagining. A full-on, no-holds-barred nude shot. My dad, being the kind of man who rarely lets things faze him, simply raised an eyebrow and muttered, "Well, that's strange," before brushing it off. He didn't respond, figuring she'd take the hint. But over the next few days, she doubled down. 5 more photos landed in his inbox, each one more explicit than the last. "Why didn't you block her after the first one?" I asked him, incredulous. He shrugged. I thought maybe she'd get bored. And I was curious. People are weird. I wanted to see how far she'd go. He decided to open the rest of the pictures, if only for the sheer absurdity of it all. The first 5 were, as he described them, vague shots with terrible lighting. He made a face as he recounted them, clearly unimpressed. They looked like she'd taken them in a basement, he said, shaking his head. No effort, no artistry. But it was the 6th photo that truly cemented this story as the strangest Tinder experience of his life. At first glance, the picture seemed similar to the others, a full-body mirror selfie with the same lackluster lighting. But as his eyes adjusted to the details, he realized something was very, very wrong. The woman was standing there in her bra, everything else exposed, but tucked into her bra were herbs. Not metaphorical herbs. Literal sprigs of basil, parsley, thyme, and who knows what else. She was posing confidently, one hand on her hip, a smirk on her face, and winking at the camera like she'd just delivered the punchline to the world's greatest joke. And the caption? Oh, the caption. It read, "Spice Rack." My dad burst out laughing as he told me this part of the story, tears streaming down his face. I couldn't believe it, he said, gasping for air. I just sat there, staring at my phone, thinking, this is where we are now. This is what dating has become. For a moment, I wasn't sure if I should be horrified or impressed by her audacity. What did you do? I asked, bracing myself for his response. Well, he said, still chuckling. I laughed so hard I had to put my phone down. Once I stopped crying, I realized I had no choice but to block her. I mean, what else can you do? She called herself a spice rack. The image he painted in my mind was impossible to shake. The sheer confidence it must have taken to not only create that moment, but to send it to another person, a person she barely knew, was both astonishing and deeply unsettling. My dad, to his credit, handled the situation better than most people would have. Instead of being angry or offended, he chose to see the humor in it. But it left him questioning whether Tinder was truly the best way to meet people. I still don't get it, he said, shaking his head. Was she trying to be funny? Sexy? Both. Whatever it wasn't working. The story quickly became a legend among our family and friends. Every time he'd retell it, he'd emphasize the absurdity of it all, mimicking her pose and delivering the spice rack punchline with perfect timing. But beneath the humor, there was a layer of caution. "It's a strange world out there," he told me one day. "You never know what you're going to get. People are unpredictable. Some will surprise you in good ways, others, well, they'll show you their spice rack." We laughed, but his words stuck with me. His experience, while bizarre and hilarious, was a reminder of how surreal online dating can be. People present themselves in ways they'd never dream of doing in real life, pushing boundaries and testing limits, often with no regard for how the person on the receiving end might feel. As for my dad, he stayed on Tinder a little while longer, though he was much more selective about who he matched with. I met Callista on a cold Thursday evening in March, the kind of Seattle night where the fog rolls down Queen and Hill like a silent avalanche. We matched on a dating app with a name so forgettable I couldn't tell you if it was Hinge, Bumble, or something more obscure like Vibe. But I remember her profile clearly. A series of high-contrast black and white photos. One of her on a rooftop, staring off like she was mid-thought. Another of her surrounded by cats. Her bio simply read, "Old soul, soft hands, looking to be adored." Something about her came off like a poem that didn't rhyme. I was intrigued. We messaged. She answered in lowercase. No punctuation. Everything was dreamy and vague. "I like the sound of your name. It sounds like the kind of name that knows secrets." Okay, strange. But I was recently heartbroken and still in that phase where red flags looked like flirtation. We met for tea at a bookstore cafe. She was wearing a coat too big for her and smelled faintly of cedar. Her eyes were this pale, unbothered gray, like she lived in black and white even when the world was in color. She barely touched her drink. She just sat there, elbows on the table, eyes scanning me like a book she'd read before but wanted to remember differently. "Do you live alone?" she asked about 20 minutes into our date. I blinked. "Yeah, in Wallingford." "Why?" She smiled. "That's good." We ended up spending the entire weekend together. That same night she came back to my place barefoot because she said shoes distorted the feeling of the earth. She made tea, rearranged my bookshelf, slept in my bed like she'd been sleeping there forever. I thought it was romantic, the way she moved through my space like she belonged in it. I didn't know then that she did think she belonged in it. Permanently. By the following Wednesday, I noticed small things. A silk scarf hanging on my bathroom door. Her coat folded on the back of my chair. I asked gently if she'd forgotten them. She shrugged. Or maybe they just found their way. 2 days later, I opened my fridge and saw oat milk. I don't drink oat milk. I never bought oat milk. She came over that night, walked in like she had a key she didn't, and kissed me hello like this was a routine. She cooked a meal using half my groceries, then left a pot of lentils on the stove for later. The next morning, I tripped over her boots. "I didn't know you left those here," I said, trying to keep my voice light. She leaned in, wrapped her arms around me from behind. "It's not about leaving. It's about staying." Something in me bristled, but I kissed her anyway. That weekend, I came back from the store to find her in my apartment. She wasn't supposed to be there. The door was locked when I left. I checked, but when I walked in, she was sitting cross-legged on my rug, burning sage. "How did you get in?" I asked. She smiled. "You always leave the bathroom window unlatched." I stared. She blew smoke into the air. This place needed clearing. I should have said something. Should have drawn the line right then. But I didn't. I was too stunned, too confused, too enchanted by the oddness of it all. By the end of the month, half my closet had her clothes. She hadn't moved in, not officially. There was no suitcase, no lease. She simply never left. Her toothbrush sat next to mine, her rings on the windowsill. She referred to the cat I didn't have as ours. One night, I came home late to find her repainting the bathroom. "What are you doing?" I asked. "The old color was too sterile," she said without looking up. "This shade is called soft grief." She painted over the tiles. "The mirror. My towel rack. Did you ask me?" I said, trying to keep my voice even. She turned. I didn't know I needed to. I called my best friend, Theo. He's blunt. Ex-military, now a counselor. Good at naming the things I'm afraid to say. "She's nesting," he said. "That's not love. That's control with incense." I nodded, even though I still wanted to believe it was eccentricity, not invasion. That same week, I found out she had given my address to her therapist. "Why?" I asked. "In case of emergencies," she said. "You're my point of contact. We've known each other 5 weeks." She looked genuinely hurt. Time isn't measured in calendars. It's measured in significance. One morning, I tried to leave for work and found my car missing. I took it to the co-op, she texted me. She had copied the keys. I never showed her where I kept the spares, but she found them. I told her it needed to stop. She cried, real tears, sat on my kitchen floor, and wept like I'd broken something ancient inside her. She said she felt safe here, said she didn't feel safe anywhere else. I said I needed space. She asked if that meant 3 feet or 5. I said I needed her to go home. She stared at me. This is home, she said. It took a week of escalating arguments. I told her she had to leave, that I didn't consent to her living here, that she wasn't on the lease, that I needed my life back. She finally packed a single duffel and left. I changed the locks that night. The next morning, there were daisies on my doorstep. No note. A week later, I received a letter. Handwritten, 5 pages long. It included quotes from Rilke, a pressed eucalyptus leaf, and a poem that started with, "You were my beginning / but your silence is an ending with teeth." I didn't reply. She started posting vague, accusatory stories on Instagram. Screenshots of my bookshelf, tagged "His lies look like novels." A photo of my door. Then one of my cat's old collar captioned, "He doesn't even miss her." I filed a police report. Nothing happened. She hadn't technically broken any laws. But then one night, I came home and found my apartment door slightly ajar. Inside, nothing was taken, but everything was moved. The couch was angled differently. My sheets were laundered. A cup of tea sat cold on the counter. There was a note. "You should really close the window. Anything could slip in." I called the police again. This time, they took it seriously. Filed it under unlawful entry. Advised me to install cameras. Change everything. I haven't seen her since. Sometimes I get friend requests from profiles with no photos. Usernames that feel familiar. Sometimes I find flower petals outside my door. Sometimes I still wake up smelling cedar and wonder if she's in the room. I've since moved. New apartment. New locks. New neighborhood. But every now and then, I check my closet and count the shoes. Just in case. Because I never saw her move in. And I'm not sure I ever saw her leave. It was supposed to be a simple coffee date. Just a casual meeting to see if this girl I'd been chatting with for a couple of days was as interesting in person as she was online. Her messages had been fun and flirty, and although I wasn't expecting fireworks, I thought it might be worth a shot. But instead, what started as a hopeful afternoon turned into one of the creepiest and most unsettling experiences of my life. To this day, the memory of it sends a chill down my spine. We'd agreed to meet at a little coffee shop downtown, the kind of cozy spot with mismatched furniture and overpriced lattes. She'd suggested it, saying it was her favorite place to hang out and that they made the best chai tea. I thought it was charming how specific she was about her drink order. Something about it made her seem more real, more grounded. That, paired with her quirky sense of humor in our chats, had convinced me to step outside my comfort zone and say yes to meeting up so quickly. I arrived a few minutes early, scanning the room for a face I recognized from her profile pictures. She wasn't there yet, so I grabbed a seat by the window, ordered a coffee, and waited. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. I figured she was running late, which was fine, it happens. But as the minutes ticked by, I started to feel a little uneasy. I pulled out my phone and sent her a quick text. "Hey, just wanted to check. Are you on your way?" The response came almost immediately. "Oh, I'm here. Been here for a while, actually." I looked around the cafe, feeling a wave of confusion. I hadn't seen anyone who even remotely resembled her pictures. I typed back, "I don't see you, where are you sitting?" Her reply made my stomach drop. "I'm not in the cafe. I'm outside, watching you." At first, I thought it had to be a joke. A weird, twisted attempt at being playful. But the longer I stared at the message, the more unsettled I became. I glanced out the window, scanning the street for anyone who looked like they might be waiting for someone. Nothing. Just strangers hurrying by, lost in their own lives. "A what?" I texted back, my heart starting to race. That's when the truth came out. The next message hit me like a punch to the gut. "I'm not who you think I am. I'm a guy. I've been catfishing you." I froze, my breath caught in my chest. My mind raced, trying to process what I'd just read. I looked around again, suddenly hyper-aware of everyone around me. Was he in here, pretending to be a stranger? Was he really outside, watching me through the window? Either way, I felt exposed, like a spotlight had been turned on me, and I couldn't escape it. Before I could reply, another message came through, and this one sent a shiver down my spine. I just wanted to see you in person. You're gorgeous. It's such a shame you're a lesbian, because I'd totally do you. My hands shook as I stared at the words on my screen. The casual audacity of it made my skin crawl. He wasn't apologetic or embarrassed. He was proud of what he'd done, as though catfishing me and stalking me in public was some kind of harmless prank. I wanted to scream, to demand why he'd done this, but I couldn't bring myself to reply. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, my thoughts racing too fast to form words. Instead, I grabbed my bag and bolted for the door, keeping my head down as I stepped onto the street. Every person I passed felt like a potential threat. Was it him? Was he following me? My heart pounded as I walked quickly to my car, resisting the urge to break into a full sprint. Once I was safely inside, I locked the doors and tried to calm myself. I still couldn't fully comprehend what had just happened. I'd heard of catfishing before, sure, but this wasn't about someone trying to scam me for money or trick me into sending nudes. This was something else entirely. He'd gone through all this effort just to stare at me? In public? The thought made my stomach churn. Later that night, when I finally worked up the nerve to check my messages again, I saw he'd sent more. Long paragraphs, full of twisted justifications for his behavior. He rambled about how he'd stumbled across my profile and been fascinated by me, how he'd created the fake profile just to get my attention. He admitted he never had any intention of meeting up in person. He just wanted to see what I was like in real life. And then came the part that really solidified the creep factor. He started criticizing me for not noticing him in the cafe. I was sitting right there, he wrote. You looked right past me. It's kind of sad, honestly. You didn't even notice. That's when it hit me. He hadn't been outside watching me through the window. He'd been in the cafe the whole time, sitting among the other patrons, pretending to be a stranger. My stomach twisted into knots as I tried to remember everyone I'd seen while I was sitting there. Was it the man in the corner with the laptop? The guy who'd been reading a book at the table next to mine? I'd been so absorbed in waiting for her that I hadn't paid attention to anyone else. The thought of him sitting there watching me, dissecting my every move, made my skin crawl. I felt violated in a way I hadn't even realized was possible. He'd stolen my time, my trust, and a little piece of my sense of safety, all for his own selfish amusement. I blocked him immediately, but the experience stayed with me. For days, I felt like I was being watched everywhere I went. Every glance from a stranger felt loaded, every interaction tinged with suspicion. It wasn't just the act itself that haunted me. It was the casual, almost playful way he'd gone about it, like it was a game to him, like my comfort, my boundaries, and my trust were nothing more than pawns on his chessboard. She was charming, funny, and quick-witted, the kind of conversationalist who made the hours disappear. By the end of the night, we were on the phone, trading stories and laughter until the early hours. She seemed so genuine, so vibrant, that I couldn't resist asking her out for the next evening. Sure, she said. That sounds great. I hung up with a grin on my face, thinking I'd stumbled onto something special. But then, 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a text. I need to tell you something. Those 6 words hung in the air as I opened the message. What could it be? A boyfriend? A deal breaker? My mind raced with possibilities, but none of them prepared me for what she said next. I'm permanently in a wheelchair. I froze. My first thought wasn't about the wheelchair itself, but the choice now in front of me. If I backed out, I'd feel like the worst kind of person, someone who couldn't look beyond a physical disability. But if I went through with the date without genuine interest, I'd feel just as awful for leading her on. Ultimately, I decided, why not? It was just a date, and if she was as great in person as she was on the phone, it could still be a good time. I texted her back, reassuring her that it wasn't a problem and that I was looking forward to meeting her. She seemed relieved, and we stayed up talking until we were both too tired to keep our eyes open. The next morning, my phone buzzed again. It was her. I'm doing something crazy, she said, her voice buzzing with excitement. I asked what it was, but she was coy. You'll see later, she said, before hanging up with a playful laugh. Hours passed, and I'd almost forgotten about the conversation when my phone chimed with a new message. It was a photo. I opened it, expecting something light-hearted or quirky. Instead, I stared at an image of her wrist, freshly tattooed with my name. Shock rippled through me as I tried to process what I was seeing. My name, inked permanently on the skin of a woman I'd never even met in person. I could almost feel the tattoo needle buzzing in the background as I read her accompanying text. Surprise! I called my friends immediately, telling them about the turn my date had taken before it had even started. Their reactions ranged from stunned silence to outright laughter. "You have to go now," one of them said. "You can't back out after she did that." They were right, of course. I had to know if the tattoo was real, and who this woman was who'd made such a bold, borderline terrifying move. That evening, I got in my car and headed to her place. It was late when I realized another potential issue. My car might not accommodate her wheelchair. I texted her to ask if she could drive instead, since I knew she had a car. She agreed, and I continued my drive, nerves mounting. When I arrived, she pulled into the parking lot just as I stepped out of my car. I had assumed her vehicle would be specially equipped for her needs, but when I climbed into the passenger seat, I discovered otherwise. She didn't have a handicapped-enabled car. She used crutches. One crutch operated the gas, the other the brake. The unease I'd felt earlier multiplied tenfold as we merged onto the Southern California freeways, weaving through traffic at speeds I wasn't comfortable with. She seemed calm, even cheerful, while I gripped the door handle and tried to think of anything other than the precarious mechanics of her driving. I told myself to relax, that she probably knew what she was doing. But when she sped up and the crutch wobbled slightly, I sent up a silent prayer. We made it to the restaurant in one piece. She parked the car, maneuvered herself gracefully into her wheelchair, and led the way inside. I was still on edge, but I tried to focus on enjoying the evening. For a while it worked. The food was good, the conversation easy. But then her phone rang. "It's my daughter," she said, glancing at the screen. Her daughter. This was the first I'd heard about her having a child. She answered the call, her face creasing with concern as she spoke. After hanging up, she explained that her 10-year-old daughter was home alone and feeling scared. "Do you want to go check on her?" I asked. It seemed like the obvious choice. She waved me off. "No, it's fine." I gave her something to help her sleep. "She'll be out soon." That response sent alarm bells ringing in my head, but I stayed quiet. We finished our meal, though my appetite had all but vanished, and I suggested we call it a night. I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling from her nonchalant attitude about leaving her child alone. On the way back, my discomfort reached a new level. As we merged back onto the freeway, she turned to me and said casually, "Wow, I feel kinda drunk." My heart stopped. "Are you okay to drive?" I asked, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. She laughed. "I'm fine. It was just one drink." Then, as if to prove her point, she shifted the crutch she was using for the gas pedal, pressing it down a little harder. The car lurched forward as she moved into the fast lane. At that moment, I made peace with my life. I was convinced this was how it would end, hurtling down a California freeway in a car driven by a woman wielding crutches as pedals. Somehow, though, we made it back to her place. My nerves were shot, and all I wanted was to go home, but I made sure to help her to her door before saying goodbye. As she wheeled herself inside, she turned to smile at me one last time. "Thanks for tonight," she said. I nodded, still in shock. "Take care." The moment I got to my car, I exhaled deeply, relief washing over me like a tidal wave. The tattoo. It was real. The chaos of the evening, also real. I had survived. Driving home, I couldn't stop replaying everything in my head. The tattoo, the crutches, the casual dismissal of her daughter's fear, and the final revelation that she'd been drinking before getting behind the wheel. I'd matched with her on Tinder, a smart, funny, and genuinely interesting woman who agreed to meet me for lunch at a Cajun spot in Dallas. I wanted to make a good impression, of course, but I had an idea that would supposedly guarantee I'd be calm, confident, and carefree. That idea? Kratom. I'd read about it recently. This powdery green substance that people swore by for its mood-enhancing, euphoric effects. It was supposed to help with anxiety, make you feel chill and open. I'd tried it the day before, following the recommended dosage by making a tea, but nothing had happened. No euphoria, no calm, nothing. So naturally, I assumed the solution was to take more. The morning of the date, I went all in. No messing with teas or careful measurements this time. Instead, I wrapped a lot of the bitter green powder in slices of deli meat, making little kratom bombs, and swallowed them whole. It wasn't the most appetizing breakfast, but I figured it'd be worth it when I strolled into the restaurant as the most laid-back version of myself she'd ever meet. When I arrived at Rizzu's, I felt fine. Maybe a little nervous, but nothing out of the ordinary. I spotted her almost immediately. She was sitting at a table, smiling as she scrolled through her phone. She looked even better in person, which only added to the pressure I'd placed on myself. I took a deep breath, straightened my shirt, and walked over. We exchanged greetings, and I sat down, doing my best to seem cool and collected. The conversation started flowing, and I felt like things were off to a good start. But then something shifted. A strange, uneasy feeling began bubbling in my stomach, growing more intense with each passing moment. At first, I thought it was nerves, but as the seconds ticked by, I realized the truth. I wasn't nervous. I was about to vomit. Not just a little. This was going to be catastrophic. Panic set in. My heart raced, and my vision blurred. My stomach churned violently, and I knew I had only seconds before I became the center of the worst possible scene in the middle of the restaurant. I managed to excuse myself, mumbling something about needing to use the restroom, and stood up. My plan was simple: make it to the bathroom before disaster struck. But disaster didn't wait. I took a few steps before the first wave hit me like a freight train. I tried to cover my mouth, but it was useless. Vomit erupted, hot and relentless, spilling through my fingers as I bolted toward the bathroom. I was choking on it, my eyes watering as I sprinted, leaving a gruesome trail across the floor that no one in the restaurant could ignore. Somehow, I made it to the bathroom. Barely. The trash can just inside the door became my savior, or as much of a savior as anything could be in that moment. I doubled over, retching violently, the contents of my stomach, deli meat and kratom, spilling out with horrifying force. It felt endless. By the time I was done, I was shaking, my face pale, and my hands trembling. I leaned over the sink, splashing cold water on my face, and trying to catch my breath. My arms were streaked with vomit, my shirt stained, and my dignity completely obliterated. I scrubbed furiously, trying to make myself presentable enough to go back out there. I could only imagine what she was thinking, sitting alone at the table, probably horrified by the sound of my escape, or worse, the trail I'd left behind. I considered leaving altogether, just sneaking out the back door, disappearing into the Dallas sun, and pretending this date had never happened. But part of me felt like that would only make things worse. I couldn't leave her there with no explanation. So, against all logic, I returned to the table. When I sat down, she looked up at me, her expression a mix of concern and awkwardness. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice careful but kind. "Yeah," I croaked, my throat raw from the ordeal. "I think I ate something weird earlier. I'm so sorry about that." She nodded, and for a moment, I thought maybe I could salvage what was left of this date. But then the smell hit me. A faint, undeniable odor of bile and regret wafted from my clothes. I could see her nose twitch slightly, and I knew she noticed it too. The rest of the meal was excruciating. I tried to power through, forcing myself to eat small bites of jambalaya in between sips of water, but my appetite was gone. She made polite conversation, probably out of pity, while I focused on not throwing up again. Every second felt like an eternity, and by the time we parted ways, I was ready to crawl under a rock and never emerge. I apologized profusely as we said goodbye, thanking her for being so understanding. She smiled and said, "No worries," but I could tell the date had been a total disaster. As I walked to my car, I replayed the events over and over in my mind, cringing at every detail. Looking back, I don't know what I was thinking. The idea of using kratom to enhance my date now feels absurd, like something out of a bad comedy. I'd wanted to impress her, to show her I was cool and confident, but instead, I became the nightmare date she'd probably tell her friends about for years. For a while after that, I avoided dating altogether. My name's Ronan. I'm a UX designer in Portland with a caffeine problem and a soft spot for houseplants I name after Greek philosophers. Dating hasn't exactly been my strong suit since my last relationship ended 2 years ago, so I figured it was time to ease back into the game. Downloaded an app. Told myself I'd just see what's out there. No pressure. That's when I met Celaya. Her profile picture was unforgettable, flowing copper hair, eyes that felt like they'd seen galaxies collapse, and a caption that read, "Energy conduit, light worker, vessel for ancestral healing." I thought it was a joke, so I messaged, "Vessel for ancestral healing? That's gotta come with a user manual, right?" She replied 3 minutes later, "You already know how. Your spirit remembers." Okay, weird, but I was intrigued. We talked over the app for 2 days. Her messages were sprinkled with words like frequency, chakras, downloads, and cosmic timing. Usually, that would send me sprinting the other way, but there was something magnetic about her. She wasn't flaky. She was intense, like she lived in a different reality but fully believed in it. And I found myself curious about that reality. We met for tea at an herbal apothecary she insisted on. The kind of place that sells loose herbs in glass jars with handwritten labels. As soon as she walked in, she didn't greet me. She closed her eyes, pressed her hand to my chest, and whispered, "Your third chakra is clouded, but your sacral energy pulses like a mountain drum." "Nice to meet you too," I said. She laughed, musical and wild, then sat across from me like she was preparing for a ritual, not a first date. The conversation was not boring. She spoke in a rhythm that didn't follow the usual logic of speech. She told me about a past life she had as a Himalayan priestess, how she'd been struck by lightning at 16, and that awakened her into the grid, and that she'd lived in a yurt off the coast of Washington for 6 months with only deer antlers and fermented mushrooms to guide her. It was all ridiculous, and I was completely fascinated. Over the next few weeks, we got close. Quickly. Every date felt like a fever dream. She'd burn sage around my apartment, rearrange my furniture to redirect the flow of consciousness. And one night, she insisted I sleep with a smoky quartz crystal under my tongue to detox my throat chakra. I did it. I even started saying things like, "I feel off today, maybe Mercury's in retrograde." Unironically, one night, after she led me in a guided meditation where we visited our shadow selves through an astral tunnel, she turned to me and said, "I think it's time for you to meet the collective." Apparently, Celaya wasn't alone. She explained that she was part of an interdimensional consciousness, a healing grid composed of 13 entities who used her as a channel. Some were ancient. Some were from star systems I'd never heard of. One was a cat being named Thresh who vibrates in tones humans can't hear. She told me the collective had been watching me and decided I was receptive. Receptive to what? Hosting. Hosting like, "You want me to house sit for the astral plane?" She smiled. "No, silly. Hosting like, you'd open yourself as a vessel, just for a bit. Let the grid move through you. Share the frequency. Lend your essence." I froze. Until now, her weirdness had been performative, harmless. But this felt like a line. What does that even mean? It means you lie down. You relax. I open the portal. They'll use your body for communication. Just briefly. It's a blessing. That sounds dangerous. She touched my knee. "Only if you resist." I laughed nervously. "Is this safe?" "The body is temporary. The spirit knows how to return." "Okay, nope." I told her I needed to think. She looked disappointed, said she respected my hesitation. Then she left a small pyramid of copper wire on my windowsill to help the energy settle. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept staring at that copper thing. My apartment felt off. Like it wasn't just mine anymore. Like something had opened. The next morning, I found a note taped to my door. "You are ready. Tonight, 3:33 a.m. Be still. They will come." I didn't sleep in my apartment that night. I stayed at a friend's place. Didn't tell him why. Just said I needed a change of scenery. When I returned the next day, the copper pyramid was gone. My plants had been moved. All the mirrors were turned to face the wall. I called her. No answer. I messaged. Nothing. She had vanished. 2 days later, I ran into a woman at a bookstore who looked familiar. I realized it was one of the baristas from the herbal shop. I asked if she knew Celaya. She sighed. "You too?" "Excuse me?" "You dated her." "Everyone dates her." She told me Celaya comes and goes every few months. Always intense. Always spiritual. Always looking for a host. Some say she's delusional. Others swear weird stuff happened after they met her. Dreams, insomnia, sudden emotional shifts. One guy moved to New Mexico to start a commune. Another went off the grid completely. As for me, I burned sage for a week straight. Reversed the mirror positions. Took a salt bath. Read 3 books on spiritual boundaries. I'm back to sleeping okay, but sometimes around 3:30 a.m., I wake up for no reason. And for a second, I swear I hear humming. Not from outside. From inside. I haven't dated since. But hey, my chakras are apparently squeaky clean. I'm going to tell my wife's worst date. She was set up by her friend with this guy who was really handsome. They were supposed to meet at a party and then go do something afterward. My wife was a fairly sheltered and wasn't really into anything but clean-cut guys at the time. This guy pulls up to the party with a full bushy beard, long hair pulled back, black leathers and boots, all on a big motorcycle. According to her, he could have been part of a biker gang. The friend was at the party and apologized because she hasn't seen the guy in a long time and didn't realize he looked like that. Anyway, my wife being my wife agreed to meet him, and they talked for a bit. The guy was a complete asshole. He made fun of just about every woman at the party, was a jerk to my wife, and actually insulted her hair. To be fair, it wasn't her best look. The guy's ex then walks into the party, and the whole time, he can see her he is ragging on her. I asked my wife why she stayed. She said he has this skin-tight black leather jacket on, and these huge arms. His was kind of hot. She asked if he wanted to go somewhere else, and he said yes. Said he had another helmet, but my wife declined. He said his house was just around the corner and would grab his car. He left and never came back. He texted the mutual friends, yeah, no. Apparently the date really did a number on my wife. She ended up completely changing her hairstyle and stopped wearing frumpy conservative girl clothes. She got super worried about how people saw her, but also gained a ton of confidence because she never wanted to have to be set up again. Now for the funny part. Fast forward 6 years or so, and we had been married for 3 years. I'm talking about how much I want to get a motorcycle, and had been looking at a few bikes. My wife assumed I didn't have any real like of bikes because in her mind I had never owned one. I told her I had owned a few but sold my last one a few months before we met to buy my grown-up car. She says, "Really, do you have any pictures?" I think about it for a while and realize I had some of my old Indian and a more recent one of my old Honda Magna. She's looking at the Indian and tells me how cool it is that I restored it. Then I hand her the picture of me on my leaning against my Magna. Full beard, long hair, black leathers and boots. Her face went white and she turns to me and says, "You asshole." Turns out I was the asshole. I had gotten out of a long-term relationship with the ex in the story. She was a real jerk about it and messed me up. She also poisoned the well for any other girl I was interested in. I was super bitter about women in general. I didn't want to be on the date, but this friend whom I hadn't talked to in almost a year insisted that I meet some random girl. So I was just trying to get out of the date. But yes, I was an asshole. After 2 weeks of talking to him online, I felt cautiously optimistic about this date. He seemed kind, intelligent, and genuinely interested in getting to know me. There weren't any red flags during our chats, and he didn't bombard me with over-the-top compliments or invasive questions. He seemed normal, and normal was all I was looking for. When he suggested dinner, I thought, why not? After all, what's the harm in meeting someone who might actually be decent? As I stood in front of the mirror that evening, smoothing out my dress and debating whether to wear heels, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this would be fun. Maybe this was someone who could surprise me in the best way. That hope began to waver almost as soon as I arrived. He was already seated when I walked into the restaurant, scrolling on his phone. I waved to get his attention, and he stood quickly, flashing a nervous smile. His appearance matched his photos, which was a relief, no surprises there. He even held my chair as I sat, a small gesture that felt reassuring. Maybe, just maybe, this would go well. The small talk started off easily enough. We discussed our weeks, shared a few anecdotes about work, and even joked about how nerve-wracking first dates could be. I felt myself beginning to relax, sipping my water and enjoying the warm, ambient lighting of the restaurant. It had been a while since I'd been out like this, and I was starting to feel glad I'd given him a chance. Then the conversation took a sharp, unexpected turn. He asked what I'd been up to recently, and I mentioned that I hadn't gone out much lately. "I've been trying to save money," I said casually. "I really need a new washer and dryer, so I'm being careful about how I spend." It felt like a harmless detail, the kind of thing you share in a conversation without expecting much of a reaction. But his response stopped me cold. "You know," he said, leaning back in his chair, "instead of saving for that, you should save for a boob job." I blinked, stunned into silence. My mind scrambled to process what I'd just heard, replaying the words in case I'd misunderstood. But there was no mistaking them. They hung in the air, sharp and heavy, like an unwelcome guest. I didn't know what to say. Should I laugh it off? Confront him? Leave? Before I could decide, he continued, as if he'd just paid me the highest compliment in the world. "No, really," he said, his tone insistent but casual. "It's not a bad thing. My sister and mom both had small chests, and they got boob jobs. They look amazing now." My stomach twisted, a mix of disbelief and anger bubbling up inside me. Did he just say that? I stared at him, waiting for some sign that he realized how wildly inappropriate his comment was, but he seemed oblivious. If anything, he looked proud of himself, like he thought he was being helpful. I glanced around the restaurant, hoping for an escape route. The waitress hadn't even brought our drinks yet. And here I was, sitting across from a man who thought comparing me to his mother and sister was an acceptable topic of conversation on a first date. I realized in that moment that staying wasn't an option. There was no salvaging this, no amount of polite small talk that could cover the gaping wound he'd just torn into the evening. The idea of enduring even one more minute of his company made my skin crawl. I stood up, grabbing my purse. "I think I'm done here," I said, my voice as steady as I could make it. He looked up at me, confusion flickering across his face. "Wait, what? Did I say something wrong?" I didn't bother answering. There was nothing to say that he would understand. Instead, I turned and walked out of the restaurant, my heart pounding and my cheeks flushed. As I stepped into the cool night air, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. I had escaped, and I didn't owe him anything. Not an explanation, not a second chance, nothing. By the time I got home, I was still replaying the evening in my mind, alternating between disbelief and anger. How could someone be so oblivious? So tactless? And why, for the life of me, did he think it was appropriate to bring up plastic surgery, let alone his mom and sister's plastic surgery, on a first date? The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. This wasn't about me. His comment said far more about him than it ever could about me. He had shown me in one fell swoop exactly who he was, a man who lacked basic respect, self-awareness, and decency. The experience stuck with me, not because it hurt my feelings, but because it reminded me of the importance of listening to my instincts. There was a time, not so long ago, when I might have brushed off a comment like his, staying at the table out of politeness or fear of being seen as too harsh. But not anymore. I've learned that my time and energy are too valuable to waste on people who don't see my worth. Looking back, I wish I had said more before leaving. Something clever or cutting. The kind of line you imagine in hindsight, but never managed to deliver in the moment. But maybe my silence spoke louder than any words could have. By walking away, I made it clear that his behavior was unacceptable, and that I wouldn't tolerate being treated as anything less than I deserve. It was a strange and uncomfortable night, but it wasn't a loss. If anything, it was a victory, a small but significant reminder that I have the power to remove myself from situations and people who don't serve me. And for that, I'm grateful. As for him, I can only hope he learned something from the experience. It was a first date, and I was cautiously optimistic. She seemed fun, engaging, and a little wild, qualities I found intriguing, even exciting. Her messages had been full of wit, and when we spoke on the phone, she had this electric energy that drew me in. So when she suggested meeting at a lively downtown bar, I thought, why not? It sounded like a good time, and I was ready for something a little different. She arrived just as I settled into a booth, her smile dazzling and her laugh contagious as she greeted me. We hit it off immediately, chatting over our first round of drinks. She was bold and unapologetically herself, and I found that refreshing. By the second round, we were laughing like old friends, swapping stories about our lives and joking about the absurdity of online dating. Then came the shots. A friendly guy at the bar had overheard us joking about my lack of tequila tolerance and decided to send a round of shots to our table. He came over with a grin and introduced himself. Let's call him Sam. Sam was cheerful, polite, and clearly just in the mood to spread some good vibes. He raised his glass to toast us and said, "To a fun night in good company." I thought it was a kind gesture. She, however, froze mid-sip. "Wait," she said, narrowing her eyes at Sam. "What's your zodiac sign?" Sam blinked, clearly taken aback. Scorpio." Her face darkened. "Of course you are," she muttered, setting her glass down. The warmth in her tone was gone, replaced by an edge I hadn't heard before. "Typical." I shot her a confused look. "Is that a problem?" She turned to me, her expression a mix of disbelief and indignation. "A huge problem," she said. "Scorpios are the absolute worst. You can't trust them. They're manipulative, sneaky, and they ruin everything." Sam, to his credit, laughed nervously. I'm not sure that's fair. I'm just here to have a good time." But she wasn't listening. Her focus was now squarely on me, her voice dropping into a conspiratorial whisper. "You need to do something about this." "Do something about what?" I asked, genuinely confused. "Him," she hissed, jerking her head towards Sam. "You need to stand up to him. Show him he can't just walk over here and ruin our night." I stared at her, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. He bought us shots, I pointed out. He's just being nice. That's how they start, she insisted, her voice growing sharper. First they're nice. Then they worm their way in, and before you know it, they've taken over. You can't let him get away with it. I blinked at her, unsure if she was serious. What exactly do you want me to do? She leaned in, her eyes blazing with intensity. You need to confront him. Start something. Let him know he can't just. She made a vague, furious gesture. Scorpio his way into our date. For a moment, I thought I must have misheard her. Surely, no one would seriously expect their date to pick a fight with a stranger over astrology. But as her gaze bore into mine, it became clear she wasn't joking. She wanted me to start a bar fight with Sam, the perfectly friendly guy who'd bought us drinks, simply because he was a Scorpio. I glanced over at Sam, who was now chatting with the bartender, completely oblivious to the chaos brewing at our table. Yeah, I'm not doing that, I said firmly. Her jaw dropped. Are you kidding me? You're just going to let him ruin our night. Our night is fine, I said, trying to keep my tone calm. He hasn't done anything wrong. She threw her hands up, exasperated. This is why Scorpios always win. No one stands up to them. I sat there, stunned by the sheer absurdity of the situation. A part of me wanted to laugh, but the other part, the part that realized she was genuinely upset, was too busy processing the fact that this was happening at all. After a long, awkward silence, she grabbed her purse and stood. If you're not going to stand up for me, then I guess this date is over. I didn't argue. She stormed out of the bar, leaving me sitting there with the shots she refused to finish, and a story I'd probably tell for the rest of my life. Sam, noticing her dramatic exit, came back over with a concerned look. Everything okay? He asked. Let's just say it was a mismatch, I replied, raising my glass. Thanks for the drinks. He smiled sympathetically and clinked his glass against mine. Anytime, man. As I sat there sipping the tequila, I couldn't help but shake my head at how quickly the night had unraveled. I'd gone into the date with high hopes, only to end up caught in a battle I didn't even know existed. A battle against the stars themselves. You ever get dumped before the relationship even starts? I have. And the wildest part? She predicted it herself. Let me rewind. I'm Elliot, 28, product photographer by trade, dog dad by choice, and someone who still doesn't understand the hype around horoscopes. Don't get me wrong, I appreciate a good vibe. I've saged my apartment after a bad roommate, and I've dated my fair share of spiritual girlies. But I'm a Virgo, so naturally I'm skeptical. This was in late September. The air had just shifted in Chicago. Cooler, sharper, the kind of crisp that makes you buy candles and pretend you bake. I'd been single for almost a year, mostly due to a breakup that felt more like being ghosted in slow motion. I was finally ready to put myself back out there. Enter Celestine. Yep, that was her real name. Or so she claimed. Her dating app profile was like reading a horoscope in human form. Clairsentient empath. Tarot intuitive. Dreamwalker. I see patterns where others see chaos. She had these huge green eyes, messy curls, and a laugh that looked like it would echo. I swiped right, mostly out of curiosity. She messaged first. Your energy is familiar. Do we know each other from a past life? I replied. Possibly. Were you the barista I tipped $20 in 2018? She sent back a crystal ball emoji and the words, let's find out. We made plans to meet at this quirky little tea shop she picked. It had velvet cushions, shelves of loose herbs, and a weirdly serious no laptops sign. When I arrived, she was already there, sitting cross-legged on a floor pillow, shuffling a deck of tarot cards. No joke. She wore a long, wine-colored dress with sleeves that trailed like smoke and had at least 6 rings on each hand. She looked like she'd wandered off the set of a fantasy movie. Elliot, she said as I sat down, your aura is very earthbound. I smiled. I'll take that as a compliment. She stared at me for a second, then nodded. Grounded, heavy with realism, logical to a fault, but your heart's been cracked recently. You're trying to feel again. Okay, a little creepy, but she wasn't wrong. Do you do that with everyone? I asked. Read them on sight? No, she said, tilting her head. Only when they're important. The first half of the date was fine. She asked lots of questions, though some were a bit unconventional. What do your dreams smell like? If you could time travel only through mirrors, where would you go? Have you ever looked into someone's eyes and felt your ancestors whisper? I mostly laughed them off, trying not to seem rude. She was intense, but in a curious, not dangerous way. I thought, maybe I could actually like her. She wasn't boring, at least. Then, after we'd finished our hibiscus tea, and I was thinking about whether to suggest a second date, she suddenly sat upright, as if struck by a bolt of insight. "I need to do your reading now," she said. "Oh, okay. I didn't know that was part of the date." She smiled. "It's not, but your guides are yelling." She pulled out a small velvet pouch and began laying out her tarot cards on the table between us. A couple at the next table glanced over. I shifted uncomfortably. She flipped 3 cards. First, the Tower. Second, the 3 of Swords. Third, the Hanged Man. "Is that good?" I asked. She looked at the spread like it had just insulted her, then looked at me. "This isn't going to work," she said solemnly. I blinked. "What?" She pointed at the cards. "The Tower means upheaval. Sudden, disruptive change. The 3 of Swords is heartbreak, betrayal, pain. And the Hanged Man, well, that's self-sacrifice. A need to let go. This connection? It's doomed. Wait, are you breaking up with me on the first date?" She touched my hand. "I'm saving us both time." "By ending something that hasn't started?" "I've seen it," she said gently. "You and I try to force something. We have 3 months of chemistry, but it gets toxic. You retreat. I spiral. We never speak again." I stared at her. "I haven't even finished my tea," I said. She smiled sadly. "It's better this way." "Are you serious right now?" She began gathering her cards. "You'll meet someone better. A librarian. In April." "Okay, now you're just making stuff up. You'll know her by her silver earrings and the smell of peppermint gum." I stood up, flabbergasted. "You're actually ending this date because your tarot cards told you were doomed?" "Yes," she said calmly. "And also because I felt it. In your energy field. You're still tethered to pain. You don't even know me." "I do," she said. "Not here." She tapped her forehead. "Here." She tapped her chest. I left. It wasn't dramatic. No yelling. Just confusion and a bitter taste of something unearned. I went home that night and deleted the app. Again. For a while I told the story like a joke. "Yeah, she dumped me before the waiter brought the check." It always got laughs. But it stuck with me. Because part of me wondered, what if she was right? I wasn't over my ex. I wasn't ready. And deep down I knew that. 6 months later, in April, I was photographing a local author's event at the library. And yeah, I met a woman. Her name was Maeve. She was smart, funny, a little shy. And yes, she wore silver earrings. And yes, she chewed peppermint gum. We've been together for 4 months now. I haven't told her this story. Not yet. But I still keep Celestine's contact card in my phone. Just in case. My name is Kellen, and I used to think I was pretty open-minded. Not like, crystal in your pocket open-minded, but live and let live, spiritual but not religious, therapy is cool open-minded. I've dated yoga instructors, tarot readers, even one girl who ran a moon circle. I'm not new to the strange. But then there was Lyra. We matched in mid-January, one of those bleak, gray weeks in Seattle where it feels like the sky forgot how to be blue. Her profile was sweet, bookish, not overly curated. She had these sleepy eyes, like she'd just woken up from a dream she didn't want to leave. One of her prompts read, "I believe love never dies." Literally. That should have been my first clue. Our first conversation was easy. Witty. We had shared tastes in old movies, strong opinions about tea, and a mutual distaste for dating apps. She was a writer, freelance, mostly poetry and short fiction. We met up at this tucked-away tea house where she brought a leather-bound journal and a pen with a feather on the end. I thought it was quirky, charming even. She asked about my dreams. Not goals, literal dreams. Then she told me she dreamed about me before we met. "That's flattering?" I said. She smiled, slow and soft. "He said you'd show up soon." "Who's he?" She hesitated, then looked out the window, like the sky might answer for her. "My ex." "Oh, are you two still close?" "He's dead." I choked a little on my jasmine oolong. She said it so calmly, like she was telling me about a childhood pet or an ex who moved across the country. "Sorry." "Wow, that's awful." She nodded. "It was sudden. Motorcycle accident. 3 years ago." "That's a long time." She tilted her head. "Not for him." I must have made a face, because she added, "I still talk to him." I wasn't sure what to say to that. I've had friends grieve in complicated ways. Some kept old voicemails. One friend still had her ex's number saved just so she could text when she missed him, even if it went nowhere. But Lyra didn't mean it like that. She meant she actually talked to him. Like conversations. Like he talked back. On our second date, she took me to a cemetery. It was unseasonably sunny for Seattle, and she wore this long, vintage coat with patches of velvet and lace. We walked between the gravestones until we reached one with the name Rowan L. Carter. "That's him," she said, kneeling to place a small blue stone on the grave. "Rowan." She looked up at me. "Say hi." Hi, Rowan." She smiled. "He says you have kind eyes." I laughed awkwardly. She wasn't kidding. That night, over wine at her apartment, she lit a candle beside a faded photograph of a guy who looked like he fronted an indie band in 2012. She called him Ro, said he was visiting. I thought it was symbolic, like a grieving ritual, but she kept pausing mid-conversation to listen. I asked her once, gently, if she felt like she was moving on. She said, "Why would I? He's still here." By our third date, it wasn't just a presence. It was a person in the room. We went to a bookstore, and she stopped at the metaphysical section, picked up a book on necromancy, and said, "He says not all of it's accurate, but it's nice to be included." I asked her what that meant. She said Rowan had crossed with awareness, that most souls blur or fade, but he stayed clear because of their connection, because they were twin flames. She described him in the present tense. "Ro likes old records. Ro doesn't like Thai food. Ro says you should wear blue more often." I started feeling like a third wheel. On our fourth date, I finally brought it up. "Lyra, are you sure you're okay?" She frowned. "Why wouldn't I be? I like you. A lot. But I feel like I'm dating both of you." She looked genuinely surprised. "But Ro likes you. That's not really the point." She touched my hand. "I'm not crazy, Kellen. This isn't about holding on. It's about honoring what is. Just because he's dead doesn't mean he's gone. I'm not saying you're crazy. You're uncomfortable." I nodded. She sighed. "Most men are. They want to be the only one." I didn't know how to respond to that. I went home that night and didn't text. She didn't either. For a few days, I wrestled with it. Was I being insensitive? Was she really talking to someone, or was it grief wrapped in mysticism? A week later, she showed up at my door. I hadn't given her my address. "I just needed to talk to you," she said. "Ro said you were drifting." I stood in the doorway, unsure whether to invite her in. "I liked you," she said softly. "So did he." "I liked you too," I said. "But this is hard for me." She nodded. "I know." Then she said the thing I'll never forget. "I'm not looking for someone to replace him. I'm looking for someone he'd trust to hold my heart when he's not holding it." There was a strange kind of beauty in that. Sad. Romantic. Impossible. "I don't think I can be that," I said. She smiled, as if she already knew. "I wish you peace," she said. "He does too." Then she walked away. I never saw her again. It all began on a Friday evening. I'd been chatting with this guy for a few weeks, and our conversations flowed effortlessly. We decided it was time to meet in person, so he invited me over to his place for dinner and a movie. Eager to see where this could lead, I agreed. When I arrived, his home was warm and inviting. The aroma of freshly cooked pasta filled the air, and soft music played in the background. We shared stories over dinner, laughter punctuating our conversation. There was an undeniable chemistry between us, a connection that felt both exciting and comforting. As the evening progressed, one thing led to another, and we found ourselves sharing more than just stories. It felt natural, like two pieces of a puzzle fitting together seamlessly. Afterwards, as we lay there catching our breath, he turned to me with a mischievous smile. "Do you want to know what I'm really into?" he asked, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. Curious and still caught up in the moment, I nodded. "Sure," I replied, expecting perhaps a confession of a favorite movie genre or an unusual hobby. But then he reached out and gently took hold of my foot. A jolt of panic surged through me. An irrational fear gripped my heart. I've always had a deep-seated aversion to anyone touching my feet. Memories of childhood discomfort and a lingering sense of vulnerability flashed through my mind. "I'm sorry, I can't," I stammered, pulling away abruptly. He looked puzzled. "Is everything okay?" But I couldn't find the words. The walls felt like they were closing in, and all I knew was that I needed to get out of there. Grabbing my clothes, I hurriedly dressed, my hands trembling. "I have to go," I managed to say, avoiding his eyes. He tried to protest, but I was already moving towards the door. My heartbeat thundered in my ears as I navigated the unfamiliar hallway, searching for the way out. Every door looked the same, and the shadows seemed to stretch ominously. Finally, I stumbled into the living room. Relief washed over me at the sight of the front door, just a few feet away. But before I could reach it, I heard footsteps behind me. "Wait," he called out. I turned briefly, only to see someone else entering the room, a woman. She paused when she saw me, her eyes widening in surprise. There was something familiar about her face, something that tugged at the edges of my memory. And then it hit me. "Dr. Thompson?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. She looked equally astonished. "Do I know you?" My cheeks flushed with a mix of embarrassment and disbelief. "Yes, I'm a former patient of yours." Recognition flickered in her eyes. "Oh, I see." The room spun as the reality of the situation sank in. I had just been intimate with a man whose mother was my old therapist. The same therapist I'd confided in about my deepest fears, including my aversion to anyone touching my feet. "I didn't realize you two knew each other," he said, glancing between us. Neither of us responded. The weight of the awkwardness was almost palpable. I needed to escape, to process this bizarre turn of events somewhere far from here. "I'm sorry, I really have to go," I said, forcing a polite smile. Without waiting for further conversation, I made my way to the door and stepped out into the cool night air. The crisp breeze was a stark contrast to the suffocating tension inside. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. A new girl I had been talking to on Tinder for a couple of weeks had suggested meeting at Dave & Buster's. I thought it was a great idea. A laid-back place, games to break the ice, and no pressure for an over-the-top fancy dinner. It seemed perfect. I arrived a few minutes early, eager, but not overly nervous. The atmosphere was exactly what I expected, buzzing with laughter, flashing arcade lights, and the occasional hum of excitement from people cheering their victories. When she walked in, she waved with a bright smile that seemed to light up the room. She was every bit as charming in person as she'd been online, and I felt myself relax. This is going to be fun, I thought. She greeted me warmly, and after a brief chat, she led me toward the back of the arcade. I assumed she wanted to start with games, maybe challenge me to a round of air hockey, or see who could rack up the most points at skee-ball. But instead, she guided me past the games, past the bar, and toward a quieter section of the building where a few tables and chairs had been set up. That's odd, I thought, but I followed her without question. She seemed so confident, so sure of where we were headed, that I didn't want to spoil the flow of the date by questioning her plan. As we approached the tables, I noticed something strange. A handful of people were already seated, all of them wearing polite but eager smiles. On one of the tables was a laptop hooked up to a small projector. My heart sank as I realized this wasn't just a spontaneous gathering. This was planned. She gestured for me to take a seat, and before I could even ask what was going on, a man in a crisp button-up shirt stood and began addressing the group. "Welcome, everyone," he said with an enthusiasm that bordered on theatrical. "You're here today because you're ready to take control of your future." I froze. The words hit me like a ton of bricks. This wasn't a date. This wasn't a fun night out. This was a pyramid scheme recruitment meeting, and I was the unwitting prey. I turned to her, my confusion written all over my face. She smiled apologetically but said nothing, as if this was a perfectly normal thing to spring on someone during a first date. I didn't know whether to laugh, leave, or just sit back and see how far this would go. Against my better judgment, I stayed, partly out of shock and partly out of curiosity. The man clicked through a PowerPoint presentation filled with glossy images of cars, mansions, and vacations, all supposedly attainable by joining this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. He spoke about financial freedom, about escaping the rat race, and about how people like me could become millionaires with just a little dedication and hard work. I tried to catch her eye, hoping for some sort of explanation. Was this a joke? A test? But she seemed completely engaged, nodding along as though every word was gospel. I couldn't tell if she genuinely believed in this, or if she was just hoping I'd fall for it too. As the presentation dragged on, I felt trapped. Leaving in the middle would have been obvious and awkward, and I wasn't sure I had the energy for that confrontation. So I did what any polite person would do. I sat there, nodding occasionally, and endured it. Inside, though, I was fuming. After what felt like an eternity, the presentation ended, and the man invited us to sign up on the spot. He even had contracts ready, complete with colorful brochures promising endless wealth. People began milling around, chatting excitedly about their potential futures as self-made millionaires. "Pretty inspiring, right?" she asked, turning to me with a hopeful smile. "Inspiring," I said flatly, trying to mask my disbelief. "Not exactly what I was expecting for tonight." She laughed nervously. "Yeah, I thought it might be a little different, but I wanted to share it with you. Isn't it amazing what they're offering?" I didn't have the heart, or the patience, to argue with her. "Sure," I muttered, grabbing my jacket. "Thanks for the invite." I left without signing anything, my head spinning as I walked through the arcade. The lights and laughter that had seemed so inviting earlier now felt surreal, like a stage set I'd stumbled onto by accident. I still reeling from a breakup, scrolling aimlessly through Tinder when I matched with her. She was gorgeous, far beyond what I thought I could pull off in my state of disarray. But it wasn't just her looks that hooked me, it was the way she talked. Bold, unfiltered, and dripping with the kind of confidence that made my pulse quicken. Every message was more daring than the last, and before long, she had me hanging on her every word. She made it clear what she wanted, and in my emotional haze, I convinced myself I wanted it too. A few days later, she insisted I come over. The timing was oddly specific, mid-afternoon, on a certain day, no flexibility. Normally, a setup like that would have sent warning bells ringing in my head, but I rationalized it away. This was a Big Ten campus, a busy and bustling place. What could possibly go wrong in the middle of the day with people all around? When I arrived, her place was modest but comfortable, the kind of apartment you'd expect to find near a college campus. She greeted me with a knowing smile, her confidence as magnetic in person as it had been through the screen. I let myself relax, believing for a moment that this was just what I needed. A carefree distraction, something to pull me out of my post-breakup slump. The first half hour went exactly as I'd hoped. We talked, flirted, and the tension between us built steadily. I couldn't believe my luck. For the first time in weeks, the ache in my chest had dulled, replaced by something light and exhilarating. And then the front door opened. At first, I didn't process it. My brain struggled to reconcile the cheerful clatter of keys and the heavy thud of boots with the cozy, private moment we were sharing. But when she froze, her expression shifting from playful to panicked, I knew something was wrong. "Who's that?" I asked, my voice low. She didn't answer. Instead, she jumped to her feet, her composure cracking as she motioned for me to stay quiet. The footsteps grew louder, and then he appeared, a man taller and broader than me, his face a storm cloud of confusion and anger. "Honey, who's this?" he asked, his tone dangerously calm as he gestured toward me. I felt my stomach drop, the pieces clicking together too late. "Wait," I stammered, turning to her. "Is this your husband?" Her silence was answer enough. The air in the room grew thick with tension, and I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. My fight-or-flight instinct kicked in, and I was leaning hard toward flight. "Look, I didn't know," I started, but he cut me off with a sharp glare. "You didn't know," he repeated, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Of course you didn't." The realization hit me like a freight train. I wasn't here by accident. She'd planned this. Her specific timing, her insistence that I come over on this particular day, at this particular hour, it wasn't a coincidence. I was a pawn in some twisted revenge plot, a tool she'd used to make him jealous, angry, or who knew what else. "I'm out of here," I said, standing and raising my hands in a gesture of surrender. I wasn't sticking around to find out how this drama unfolded. To my surprise, he didn't try to stop me. He just stood there, staring at her with a mix of hurt and fury that made my chest ache in sympathy. I slipped past him, out the door and into the hallway, my heart pounding as I made my escape. The walk back to my car felt endless. Every step echoed with the realization of how easily I'd been manipulated, how willingly I'd walked into a situation that could have gone so much worse. I couldn't believe I'd been so blind, so desperate for validation that I'd ignored every red flag along the way. When I finally reached my car, I sat behind the wheel for a moment, letting the adrenaline ebb away. The events of the afternoon replayed in my mind, each detail more surreal than the last. I felt a strange mix of relief and anger, relief that I'd gotten out unscathed, and anger at myself for letting it happen in the first place. That day marked the end of my Tinder adventures. The app was deleted before I even pulled out of the parking lot. Date 1 went pretty well. We hit it off, she's cute. I ask what book she's reading. She says, "I'm reading about the history of Thomas Aquinas." I'm not particularly religious, but I was raised Catholic. We get into a great conversation about the medieval church and its effect on the world. Smart, cute, funny. Definitely a second date. Date 2. After a meal and a drink, she asks, "What are your 5-year plans?" I think she's joking and say, quoting The Office, "I plan to be 5 years sober." No response. The Office, never heard of it. Huh. Okay, what are your 5-year plans? I plan to be married and have at least 2 kids. Huh. Flash to. Can you give me a ride home? Sure, I say. But the ride home is well outside of the city to a pretty rural part of my small state. She's giving me directions, and it's getting more and more in the middle of nowhere. We finally turn onto a long driveway that belongs to a large piece of land with a tall fence around it. I drive up slowly. You live here? Oh yeah, I live with a family here. A family? Yeah, I met them through my church. I spot a golf cart driven by a woman with a teenage boy passenger, just coasting back and forth along the perimeter of the property. I don't ask about them. Do you want to come in and see my plants? We had a common interest in gardening. Sure. But before we can go in, a tall, thick man stops us. Turns out he owns the property. He's a state trooper and built this place for his family to prepare for the Y2K bug when society was supposed to fall apart. IT didn't, but thank God I did because we got that guy in the White House now, right? Ha ha ha, yeah. I got a whole armory just in case. Oh wow, okay. The girl leads me into the house and shows me not a few plants, but at least 200 seedlings under grow lights. She enthusiastically points out tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, etc. We could feed dozens of people with these plants. Whoa, this is way more than the casual gardening I talked about. Yeah, well, I take things to extreme. There's a loud, animal shriek behind me. What was that? Oh, that's just James. Do you want to meet him? She leads me to the living room, where the windows are blacked out, and a projector is showing a muted TV land on the wall in 20 glorious feet. James is over here. I walk over to a bedroom which has a door off its hinges and set on its side, blocking the doorway, from which you can see the TV projection. Inside is the teenage boy I saw on the golf cart earlier. It turns out he's severely retarded, and the only thing that calms him is the television. But he doesn't do well with strange men, so he starts screaming and screaming and screaming as he runs back and forth in his empty bedroom. My date is trying to calm him down, and is doing this awkward shrug/smile combo like, "Kids this days, am I right?" I excuse myself, saying I'm clearly upsetting him. I'm almost running to my car. But before I can jump in it, the state trooper stops me and says, "I didn't want to say it in front of my date, but I think shit's going to hit the fan pretty soon. When it does, you'll always have a spot here. Great Hanks bye. My date is at the window. I had a lot of fun. When can I see you next? I'll call you." I did not.